Boy runs with a lifeless baby to the hospital, but what the doctor discovers shocks everyone. The morning light filtered through the windows of Little Treasure's daycare center, casting warm rectangles on the alphabet rug where Marcus Wheeler sat cross-legged, carefully arranging wooden blocks. At 17, he towered over the tiny furniture, his long legs cramped from sitting at child height for the past hour. Still, there was something peaceful about the quiet morning routine. Being the first to arrive, setting up the activities for the day, listening to Ms. Patricia humming old Motown songs in the kitchen as she prepared morning snacks. 6 months ago, if anyone had told him he'd find peace in a daycare center, he would have laughed. But life had a way of surprising you, especially when you least expected it. "Marcus?" Ms. Patricia's voice carried from the kitchen. "Could you check the thermometer by the window? Weather report says we're in for a cold snap today." "Yes, ma'am." He unfolded himself from the floor, joints cracking as he stretched to his full height. The old Victorian house that housed Little Treasures had its quirks, and temperature control was definitely one of them. The ancient radiators worked overtime during Boston winters, but they weren't always up to the task. Marcus walked to the window, his reflection ghosting across the glass. A tall, lanky teenager in neat khakis and the blue polo shirt that was part of his volunteer uniform. His mother had ironed it carefully this morning, just like she did every morning, her way of showing support for this new chapter in his life without having to find the words. The digital thermometer read 68 degrees Fahrenheit, comfortable enough for now. Outside, gray clouds hung low over Beacon Hill, threatening snow. Early morning commuters hurried past on the sidewalk, bundled in heavy coats and scarves, clutching steaming coffee cups like lifelines. Still holding at 68, he called back to Ms. Patricia. "Want me to turn up the radiators?" "Not yet, honey. Let's see how it goes." She appeared in the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. At 62, Patricia Morrison was a force of nature packed into 5 feet of grandmother-like warmth. Her silver-streaked hair was always pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes missed nothing. Those eyes studied him now with their usual mixture of kindness and assessment. "You're here early again." Marcus shrugged, turning back to the blocks. "Mom's got the early shift at the hospital this week. Figured I might as well come in and get things set up." What he didn't say was that being early meant he could avoid the stares from some of the parents during normal drop-off time. Most had gotten used to his presence over the past 3 months, but there were still a few who clutched their children a little tighter when they saw him, who asked Ms. Patricia in whispers they thought he couldn't hear if she was sure about that boy working with the babies. His mother's words would echo then. "The world's gonna see what it wants to see, baby. You just gotta keep proving them wrong." "The Collins family is coming in for a tour this morning," Ms. Patricia said casually, too casually. "They're looking to enroll their daughter, Emma, 9 months old." Marcus nodded, recognizing this for the warning it was. New parents were always the hardest to win over. "Want me to make myself scarce?" "No." Her voice was firm. "You're part of this daycare, Marcus. A valuable part. It's about time people started seeing that." Before he could respond, the front door chimed. Ms. Patricia straightened her apron and headed for the entrance. "That'll be them now. Keep doing what you're doing with the blocks. Sometimes the best way to show people who you are is to just let them watch you be yourself." Marcus returned to his careful construction. He was building a castle, the kind that would delight the toddlers when they arrived, full of towers and archways, but sturdy enough to withstand excited little hands. He heard voices in the foyer, the murmur of adult conversation, then the distinct sound of a baby's fussy whimper. "And this is our main play area," Ms. Patricia was saying as she led the family into the room. "As you can see, we believe in providing an engaging environment with plenty of educational." The whimpering grew louder, threatening to become a full cry. Marcus kept his eyes on his work, adding another tower to his castle, but he couldn't help hearing the mother's worried voice. "She's been like this all morning. The pediatrician says it's just separation anxiety, but..." The baby's cries grew stronger, echoing off the high ceilings. Without thinking, Marcus began to hum softly. 3 little birds. the same song his mother used to sing to his baby sister. It was automatic, a habit born from years of helping with Jordan before everything changed. The crying hitched, then quieted. He risked a glance up and found himself looking into the biggest brown eyes he'd ever seen. The baby, Emma, was staring at him from her mother's arms, tear tracks still shining on her chubby cheeks, completely transfixed by the sound of his humming. He finished the song softly, then gave her a small smile before returning to his blocks. The silence that followed felt heavy with surprise. "Well," Ms. Patricia said, and Marcus could hear the smile in her voice. "It seems like Emma's already making friends." Later, after the Collins family had left, with Emma waving her tiny hand at Marcus as they went, Ms. Patricia found him organizing the book corner. "They're enrolling her," she said, "starting next week." She paused, then added, "I told them about your background, Marcus. About the youth program, about how you came to us. I hope that was okay." He looked up, surprised. Usually, she left that conversation for him to handle if and when he chose to. "What did they say?" "They said anyone who could calm their daughter that quickly was someone they wanted to know more about." She smiled. "Sometimes, child, the best way to change people's minds is to just be exactly who you are." Marcus nodded, feeling something tight in his chest begin to loosen. Outside, the first snowflakes of the day began to fall, dusting the windowsills with white. The radiator clanked and groaned, fighting against the dropping temperature. But inside Little Treasures, Marcus felt warm. He didn't know it then, but that morning marked the beginning of something none of them could have predicted. In the weeks to come, Emma Collins would become more than just another baby in his care. She would become the catalyst for a chain of events that would test everything he believed about himself, about second chances, and about what it means to be truly brave. But for now, he simply returned to his work, humming softly as the snow fell outside, content in the knowledge that for the first time in a long time, he was exactly where he needed to be. The weeks following Emma Collins' arrival at Little Treasures brought changes that nobody, least of all Marcus, could have anticipated. December had settled over Boston like a heavy blanket, transforming the city into a landscape of white frosted brownstones and steam-clouded windows. Inside the daycare, life fell into a rhythm as predictable as the winter snow. Every morning at 8:15, Sarah Collins would arrive with Emma bundled against the cold. The first few days, Sarah's smile had been tentative when she saw Marcus, her grip on Emma's carrier just a little too tight. But Emma's reaction to him was impossible to ignore. The moment she heard his voice, her whole face would light up, tiny hands reaching out with unwavering certainty. "I've never seen anything like it," Sarah confided to Ms. Patricia one morning, when she thought Marcus couldn't hear. "She won't even go to my sister like that, and Lisa's been around since she was born." Marcus tried not to let it matter too much, this gradual warming in Sarah's eyes. He focused instead on doing his job, on proving through actions what words could never quite convey. He learned Emma's schedule by heart, her preference for the blue pacifier over the pink one, how she liked to be held with her head tucked under his chin when she was tired, the specific bounce and sway rhythm that could soothe her teething pain. One morning, as he was singing Emma to sleep for her nap, he caught Miss Patricia watching him with an odd expression. "What?" he whispered, carefully laying Emma in her crib. "Nothing." She smiled, shaking her head. "Just thinking about the day you first walked in here with Mr. Rodriguez. Remember what you said when I asked why you wanted to work with children?" Marcus did remember. He'd been looking at his shoes, shoulders hunched against the weight of his past, said I wanted to be around something good for a change. "And now look at you." She gestured to Emma, peacefully sleeping. "Sometimes the good finds us when we least expect it." The memory of his sister Jordan tried to surface then, but he pushed it away. Some wounds were still too fresh to examine, even after all this time. As December progressed, Marcus settled deeper into his role at Little Treasures. The other parents began to relax around him, some even seeking him out during pickup time to ask about their children's day. He started taking classes 2 evenings a week at the community college, early childhood development courses that Mr. Rodriguez had helped him enroll in. "You've got a gift," Mr. Rodriguez had said during their monthly check-in. "Might as well make it official." Even Thomas Collins, Emma's father, had begun to thaw. A corporate lawyer with an perpetually worried expression, he'd been the more openly skeptical of Emma's parents at first. But one evening, arriving early for pickup, he'd stood in the doorway watching Marcus read "Goodnight Moon" to Emma and 2 other infants, all of them completely captivated by his dramatic whispers and gentle gestures. "You're good with them," Thomas had said afterward, something like surprised respect in his voice. "Really good." "Thank you, sir," Marcus had replied, careful to maintain the professional distance Ms. Patricia had taught him. Never too familiar, never too casual, always aware of the line between caregiver and parent. But then came the morning that changed everything. It started with the snow. Heavy, wet flakes that had been falling since dawn. The old radiators in Little Treasures were working overtime, filling the rooms with their familiar clanking and hissing. Marcus arrived early as usual, stomping snow from his boots in the entryway. "Thermometer's reading a little low," Miss Patricia called from the kitchen. "Would you check the basement? Make sure the boiler's keeping up?" The basement of Little Treasures was a maze of storage rooms and ancient utilities. Marcus made his way down the creaking stairs, flashlight in hand. The boiler, a hulking metal beast that had probably been installed during the Roosevelt administration, was making an unusual rattling sound. "Ms. Patricia?" he called up the stairs. "I think we might have a problem down here." She appeared at the top of the stairs, frowning. "What kind of problem?" "Not sure, but it doesn't sound right. Maybe we should call—" The sound of the front door chime interrupted him. Parents arriving early, driven by the worsening weather. Ms. Patricia hurried to greet them, calling back, "Keep an eye on it. I'll phone the repair service as soon as I get everyone settled." Over the next hour, children arrived in a steady stream as parents rushed to beat the deteriorating conditions. The temperature in the daycare held steady, though the radiator's clanking grew more pronounced. Marcus kept busy with the morning routine, helping with coats and boots, organizing activities, keeping the older children entertained while the babies napped. Emma arrived with Sarah at her usual time, dressed in a tiny pink snowsuit that made her look like a marshmallow. She squealed with delight when she saw Marcus, nearly launching herself out of her mother's arms. "She was asking for Mar all morning," Sarah said with a laugh, handing her over. "At least I think that's what she was trying to say." Marcus felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the building's heating system. Emma's first attempts at his name had started a few days ago, and each time she did it, it felt like a tiny miracle. Sarah lingered longer than usual, reluctant to head out into the storm. "The weather's supposed to get worse. They're talking about early closures downtown. Should I?" "We'll be fine," Miss Patricia assured her. "We've got emergency procedures in place if things get bad, and Marcus is staying late today to help out." Sarah nodded, kissed Emma goodbye, and headed out into the swirling snow. Through the windows they could see the storm intensifying, the world beyond the glass becoming increasingly white and formless. It was during morning snack time that the first real sign of trouble appeared. The radiator's clanking had turned into an ominous wheeze, and Marcus noticed Emma shivering slightly in her playpen. "Miss Patricia?" He tried to keep his voice casual to avoid alarming the children. "Think we might need to check that temperature again." She was already moving toward the thermometer, her face tightening as she read the display. 64 degrees and dropping. She pulled out her phone, presumably to call the repair service, then frowned at the screen. No signal. The storm must be affecting the towers. Marcus looked around the room. They had 15 children today, including 4 infants. The older ones were already asking to keep their coats on, and Emma's lips were starting to look slightly blue. "Something's wrong," he said, lifting her quickly from the playpen. Her skin felt cool to the touch, much cooler than it should be. "Ms. Patricia, something's really wrong. She's not just cold, she's..." Emma's eyes fluttered, her usually animated face becoming unnaturally still. And that's when Marcus Wheeler realized he was about to make a decision that would change not just his life, but the lives of everyone at Little Treasures Daycare. A decision that would either damn him or save him. But in that moment, looking into Emma's increasingly vacant eyes, he knew there was really no decision at all. "I'm taking her to the hospital," he said, already moving toward the coat rack. "Mass General's 6 blocks away. I can run it." "Marcus, wait," Ms. Patricia started, but he was already wrapping Emma in her blanket, his mind racing ahead to the fastest route through the snow-choked streets. "Call an ambulance if you can get a signal," he called back. "Call her parents." "But I'm not waiting. Something's really wrong with her, and I'm not going to stand here and watch it happen." The last thing he heard as he burst out into the storm was Miss Patricia's voice, tight with worry. "Be careful. Both of you. Please. Be careful." The snow hit his face like tiny needles as he began to run, holding Emma close to his chest. He didn't know then that his actions in the next 20 minutes would spark a chain of events that would test not just his character, but the assumptions and prejudices of an entire community. All he knew was that the small bundle in his arms was getting more still by the second, and that whatever consequences awaited him at the end of this run, they couldn't possibly be worse than doing nothing at all. The wind howled around him as he ran, and somewhere in the distance, church bells began to toll the hour, their sound muffled by the falling snow. The emergency room at Massachusetts General pulsed with the controlled chaos typical of winter storm days. Through the sliding glass doors, bursts of Arctic air accompanied each new arrival, carrying swirls of snow and the sharp scent of approaching night. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across faces drawn tight with worry, while the squeak of medical shoes against linoleum provided a steady backbeat to the murmured conversations and occasional cry of pain. Sarah Collins burst through these doors at 10:47 a.m., snow melting from her carefully styled hair, her camel hair coat askew and dotted with dark spots of moisture. The scene that greeted her made her blood run cold. 2 police officers stationed by the entrance, their faces professionally blank. Security guards positioned at every corridor junction, speaking quietly into radio units. And a cluster of hospital administrators near the intake desk, their hushed conversation cutting off abruptly as they noticed her arrival. "My daughter," she gasped, manicured fingers gripping the counter so hard her knuckles went white. "Emma Collins. I was told." Her voice caught, the words sticking in her throat like shards of ice. The morning replayed in her mind. Emma's unusual fussiness at breakfast, the way she'd clung to Sarah longer than usual at drop-off, as if she'd known something was coming. "Mrs. Collins?" A serious-faced man in an expensive suit stepped forward from the group of administrators. "I'm Howard Matthews, Hospital Chief of Security. Please, come with me." "Where's my baby?" The hysteria in her voice drew glances from the waiting room. "They said on the phone, your daughter is receiving care," Matthews interrupted smoothly, his hand hovering near her elbow without quite touching it. "But there are some circumstances we need to discuss." Sarah followed him through the labyrinth of hospital corridors, her heels clicking against the linoleum in an uneven rhythm that matched her racing heart. Through the windows lining one wall, she could see the snow falling harder now, transforming Boston into a white blur. The city was disappearing, much like her sense of normalcy had disappeared with that phone call 40 minutes ago. "Mrs. Collins, there's been an incident at Little Treasures." Matthews led her to a small conference room tucked away from the main traffic areas. A detective was waiting inside, his weathered face bearing the careful neutrality that comes from years of delivering bad news. Beside him sat a woman in a charcoal business suit who introduced herself as Rebecca Torres from Child Protective Services. Sarah's world tilted sideways. The room seemed to spin, and she grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. "Child Protective? What's going on?" "Please, sit down, Mrs. Collins," Detective Morrison said, gesturing to the chair she was gripping. His voice had that particular gentleness that police officers reserve for victims' families. "What can you tell us about Marcus Wheeler?" "Marcus?" The question seemed to come from very far away. He's one of Emma's caregivers at Little Treasures. What does this have to do with... Are you aware of his criminal record?" The words hit her like a physical blow. Sarah sank into the chair, her legs no longer able to support her. "Criminal?" Last year, Mr. Wheeler was involved in an incident resulting in the death of a minor. The room seemed to contract around her. Sarah's mind raced back through every interaction with Marcus, his gentle way with Emma, the songs he would sing, the way her daughter's face would light up at the sight of him. How could someone who brought such joy to her baby have such darkness in his past? Death of... number. There must be some mistake. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant and hollow. "Marcus wouldn't... He's so good with Emma. She loves him." Ms. Torres leaned forward, her expression carefully composed. "Mrs. Collins, we have reason to believe that Mr. Wheeler may have deliberately exposed your daughter to dangerous conditions today." "What? No, that's ridiculous." Sarah shook her head violently, sending droplets of melted snow flying from her hair. "The heating failed. He brought her to... The heating system at Little Treasures was functioning normally in every room except the infant care area." Detective Morrison cut in, consulting a small notebook. "We have witnesses who say Mr. Wheeler was seen in the basement near the control panel this morning before the temperature drop occurred." Sarah's mind raced back through the morning. Emma's unusual fussiness, Marcus's quick offer to take her, his insistence on being the one to handle her feedings today. Details that had seemed innocent just hours ago now took on a more sinister cast. She felt sick. But why would he? "We believe he may have been attempting to recreate the circumstances that led to the death of his sister last year." The door burst open before Sarah could process this revelation. Thomas Collins stood in the doorway, his usual lawyer's composure cracking around the edges. Snow dusted his dark suit, and his tie was askew, small details that spoke volumes about his state of mind. Thomas never looked anything less than perfectly put together. "Where's Emma?" he demanded, his voice carrying the authority that had won him countless courtroom victories. "What's happening?" Before anyone could respond, a new figure appeared behind Thomas, a petite Asian woman in a white coat, her face bearing the focused intensity of someone who had been dealing with emergencies all day. "Mr. and Mrs. Collins?" Dr. Chen's expression was carefully neutral. "There's something you need to see." They followed Dr. Chen through the maze of corridors, each step echoing with unasked questions. The hospital seemed different now, more threatening, as if its very walls held secrets waiting to be revealed. Thomas's hand found Sarah's, squeezing tightly. The gesture reminded her of another hospital corridor, 3 years ago, when they'd rushed to the same building thinking they'd lost Emma before she was even born. False labor, it had turned out. But the fear, that bone-deep terror of losing their child, felt exactly the same. Through the observation window of a small treatment room, they could see Emma looking impossibly tiny under warming blankets, surrounded by monitoring equipment that beeped in steady, reassuring rhythms. But it was the second figure in the room that made Sarah gasp. An elderly woman in navy scrubs sat beside Emma's bed, her silver hair pulled back in a familiar bun. Ms. Patricia looked up as they entered, and Sarah was struck by how old she suddenly appeared. The usual warmth and energy that characterized the daycare director had been replaced by something heavier, more burdened. "Before you say anything," Ms. Patricia began, raising a hand to forestall the flood of questions she must have seen in their faces. "There's something you need to know about Marcus, about Jordan, about everything." She pulled a worn photograph from her pocket and handed it to Sarah. The image showed a younger Marcus, maybe 15, holding a little girl with his same wide smile. They were sitting on a park swing, autumn leaves swirling around them, both laughing at something beyond the camera's view. "That's Jordan Wheeler," Ms. Patricia said softly. Marcus's sister. She was 3 when this was taken. 3 months later, she was gone. The story that followed emerged in pieces, like a puzzle being assembled in reverse. Jordan Wheeler had been Marcus's 3-year-old sister, a bright, beautiful child with an undiagnosed heart condition that had been missed in routine checkups. On a winter day much like this one, during a game of hide-and-seek, she had collapsed suddenly. Marcus, only 16 and home alone with her while their mother worked a double shift at the hospital cafeteria, had tried desperately to save her. He ran 12 blocks through the snow to Boston Children's, Ms. Patricia continued, her voice thick with emotion. Carried her the whole way, singing to her, trying to keep her warm. By the time he got there, she trailed off, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. The guilt nearly destroyed him. A new voice added from the doorway. Mr. Rodriguez, Marcus's youth counselor, stood there, his dark eyes heavy with remembered pain. That's why he started acting out, getting into trouble. He blamed himself for not recognizing the signs sooner, for not knowing what to do. The incident in his record? He broke into a medical training facility at night, was trying to teach himself emergency pediatric care. But the heating system, Detective Morrison interjected, though his voice held less certainty now. The witnesses. Check your witnesses again, Mr. Rodriguez replied, holding up his phone. Because I have security footage from Little Treasures showing exactly what happened in that basement this morning. Marcus wasn't sabotaging anything. He was desperately trying to fix the heating when he realized it was failing. And I have the repair company's preliminary report right here. He handed his phone to the detective. The time-stamped footage showed Marcus in the basement, frantically working with tools, making repeated calls on his phone that clearly weren't going through. The timestamp matched the period when the storm had knocked out cell service across the area. Dr. Chen stepped forward then, her tablet displaying a series of test results. The medical terminology was complex, but the implications were clear. Emma had a rare condition called pediatric reflex cold bradycardia, causing her heart rate to drop dramatically in response to cold temperatures. Her symptoms today, Dr. Chen explained, pulling up another file, were nearly identical to those documented in Jordan Wheeler's final crisis. The implications hit everyone like a physical wave. Marcus hadn't been recreating a tragedy. He'd been preventing one. He'd recognized the signs because he'd seen them before, in the worst moment of his life. But there was more. A nurse appeared with another set of medical records, Jordan Wheeler's final autopsy report, updated 6 months ago with new genetic information. She had carried a marker for the same condition that had affected Emma today. Don't you see? Dr. Chen said softly, looking from Sarah to Thomas. If Marcus hadn't recognized those symptoms, if he hadn't acted exactly as he did, history would have repeated itself in the worst possible way. Sarah sank into a chair beside Emma's bed, her hand finding her daughter's. The little girl's skin was warm now, her color good. All the monitors showed strong, steady rhythms. She tried to imagine how different this scene might be if Marcus hadn't known what to look for, hadn't understood the urgency of those first warning signs. Where is he now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. In custody, Detective Morrison admitted reluctantly. Downtown. Thomas straightened, and Sarah recognized the shift in his posture. This was Thomas the lawyer now, the man who had never lost a case when he believed in his client's innocence. On what charges? Technically, none. It was protective custody given his history, but get him released, now. Thomas's voice was pure steel. And then get me every piece of paper documenting this department's actions today. Every single one. But Sarah wasn't listening anymore. She was watching Emma, who had begun to stir. Her daughter's eyes fluttered open, and her first unclear word was unmistakable. Mar? The room fell silent. In that moment, the full weight of what had nearly happened, not just to Emma, but to Marcus, hit them all. They had almost destroyed a young man's second chance at redemption because of assumptions, because of fear, because of a past that had been misunderstood in the worst possible way. Ms. Patricia stood slowly, her joints creaking slightly. There's something else you should know. The reason Marcus was so insistent on working with the infants, on taking all those early childhood development classes. She pulled out her phone and showed them another photo. It was Marcus sitting on the alphabet rug at Little Treasures, surrounded by medical textbooks. He's been studying cardiac care in infants. 3 nights a week after his shift ends, he takes classes at the community college. He wants to become a pediatric cardiac nurse because of Jordan. Sarah looked at Thomas, tears streaming down her face. We have to fix this. Thomas nodded, already pulling out his phone, no doubt mentally composing the legal strategy that would clear Marcus's name. But fixing it would prove more complicated than any of them imagined. Howard Matthews reappeared in the doorway, his face grave. We have a problem, he said, holding up his tablet. On the screen, a local news website's headline screamed, "Troubled teen endangers infant at elite daycare." Below it, Marcus's yearbook photo was juxtaposed with an image of Little Treasure's facade, police cars visible in the frame. It's already gone viral, Matthews continued. The press is outside. They're calling it a near tragedy stopped by alert staff. They're painting him as a monster, Sarah finished, her voice breaking. We helped paint him as a monster. Through the window, she could see the snow was falling harder now, transforming the hospital parking lot into a blank canvas. Somewhere out there, Marcus Wheeler sat in a cell, probably thinking he'd lost everything. His job, his future, his chance at redemption. All because he'd had the courage to remember his worst day, to recognize its patterns in time to prevent another family from experiencing the same loss. Emma stirred again, reaching out with one tiny hand. Sarah caught it, feeling the strong, steady pulse in her daughter's wrist. Thanks to Marcus, that pulse would continue to beat. Thanks to Marcus, she wouldn't have to know what it felt like to lose a child to the cold. Thomas, she said, turning to her husband, whatever it takes, whatever it costs, we make this right. He nodded, already dialing his phone. First step, we get him out. Then we call every media contact I have. We tell the real story. Dr. Chen cleared her throat. The hospital will support this. The medical records clearly show. No, Sarah interrupted. Not just the medical facts, the whole story. About Jordan. About what he's been studying. About everything. The world needs to know who Marcus Wheeler really is. Ms. Patricia smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. He won't like that. He's never wanted attention for any of it, especially not about Jordan. Sometimes, Thomas said quietly, the stories we least want told are the ones that most need telling. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in white, while inside the hospital, a small group of people began the difficult work of untangling truth from assumption, redemption from revenge, and the complex ways in which the past shapes but does not define us. Emma slept peacefully now, her vital signs strong and steady. Above her bed, the monitors beeped a quiet rhythm, like a metronome counting out the moments until justice could find its way through the storm. And somewhere across the city, in a holding cell at Boston Police Department, Marcus Wheeler sat alone, unaware that his act of desperate courage had not only saved a life, but had set in motion a chain of events that would force an entire community to confront its deepest prejudices. The story of 2 children, one lost, one saved, was about to become something larger, a testament to the power of second chances, and a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is remember our deepest wounds, not to dwell in them, but to ensure they never wound another. Snow was still falling 2 days later when Marcus Wheeler walked out of the Boston Police Department, blinking in the harsh morning light. Mr. Rodriguez stood waiting beside his salt-stained Civic, a garment bag draped over one arm. Thought you might want to change before the press conference, he said, holding out the bag. Marcus stared at it uncomprehendingly. Press conference? Thomas Collins has arranged everything. He's got all the major networks. Mr. Rodriguez studied his young charge's face. You don't have to do this, you know. He's already handled the legal side. The charges are dropped, your record is sealed. Marcus took the garment bag slowly. Inside was a new charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, navy tie. The kind of outfit that said, "Trust me, believe me, hear me." How's Emma? Going home today. The doctors say she'll need regular monitoring, but she'll be fine. Mr. Rodriguez paused. Her parents want you there. For the discharge. Marcus shook his head. I can't. After everything, you're the reason she's going home at all. The drive to Massachusetts General took longer than usual, the streets still clogged with plowed snow. Marcus watched the city crawl past, remembering another snowy day, another desperate drive to a hospital. But this time the ending was different. The hospital's main entrance was crowded with news vans and reporters stamping their feet against the cold. Mr. Rodriguez drove around to a side entrance where Thomas Collins waited, looking every inch the successful attorney in his perfectly tailored suit. Marcus? He extended his hand. We have about 20 minutes before the press conference. There's someone who wants to see you first. The pediatric ward was quieter than Marcus remembered. They stopped outside room 412, and Thomas gestured for him to go in alone. Sarah Collins sat in the rocking chair by the window, Emma cradled in her arms. Both looked up as Marcus entered, and Emma's face split into her familiar broad smile. Mar. She reached for him with both hands. Marcus stood frozen in the doorway until Sarah stood and crossed to him, gently transferring Emma to his arms. The baby immediately snuggled into his shoulder, her favorite position. We've been talking about Jordan, Sarah said softly. Marcus stiffened, but Sarah continued. About how proud she would be of her big brother. About how her story helped save Emma's life. I should have saved her too. The words came out before he could stop them. No. Sarah's voice was firm. You did everything you could for Jordan. And because of that experience, because you remembered every detail, you knew exactly what to do for Emma. Jordan is still saving lives, through you. Emma patted Marcus's cheek with one tiny hand, and he felt tears starting to form. Sarah pretended not to notice, continuing in a conversational tone. We've been thinking, she said, about starting a foundation. The Jordan Wheeler Foundation for Pediatric Cardiac Care. Full scholarships for promising nursing students, funding for research into early detection of conditions like PRCB. She paused. We'd like you to be on the board. Marcus looked up sharply. Me? Who better? You're already studying pediatric nursing, aren't you? All those books at the daycare. How did you... Ms. Patricia told us everything about your classes, your goals. Sarah smiled. The foundation's first scholarship is yours if you want it. Full ride, any nursing program in the country. Before Marcus could respond, Thomas appeared in the doorway. It's time. The press conference was set up in the hospital's main conference room. Marcus sat between Thomas and Dr. Chen as cameras flashed and reporters called out questions. He listened as the doctor explained PRCB, as Thomas outlined the legal facts, as Mr. Rodriguez spoke about redemption and second chances. Then it was his turn. Marcus stood slowly, adjusting the tie that suddenly felt too tight. The room fell silent. 3 years ago, he began, I lost my sister Jordan. His voice cracked, but he pushed on. He told them everything. About the game of hide and seek, about running through the snow, about the guilt and the pain and the desperate need to make sure it never happened to another family. When he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Later that evening, back in his own bedroom, Marcus opened his laptop to find his story had gone viral, but not the way the police had initially spun it. This version, the true version, was being shared with hashtags like #2 second chances and #2 the Jordan legacy. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. It was a photo of Emma, home now, wearing a onesie that read, My hero wears scrubs, in training. Below it was a simple message. See you Monday? Marcus smiled, thinking of the daycare, of Ms. Patricia's proud smile, of tiny hands reaching for him and squealing, "Mar Mar." See you Monday, he typed back. Outside, the snow had finally stopped falling. In its place, a brilliant sunset painted the city in shades of hope, turning every icy surface into something golden and new. Somewhere, Marcus liked to think, Jordan was smiling. Spring came early to Boston that year. March winds swept away the last traces of winter, and Little Treasure's daycare bloomed with new life, literally, as Ms. Patricia's window boxes erupted with pansies and early tulips. Marcus Wheeler adjusted his graduation cap in the hallway mirror, the blue tassel swaying with each movement. His white medical scrubs beneath the gown marked him as part of the first graduating class of the Jordan Wheeler Foundation's accelerated nursing program. Still crooked, his mother said, reaching up to straighten the cap. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Your sister would be so proud. Before Marcus could respond, a familiar squeal echoed down the hallway. 3-year-old Emma Collins came barreling toward him, her dark curls bouncing. Nurse Marmar, up, she demanded, arms raised. Marcus scooped her up, careful not to wrinkle his graduation gown. What do you think, Miss Emma? Do I look ready? She studied him seriously, then reached for his stethoscope, his graduation gift from the Collins family, inscribed with both Emma's and Jordan's names. You need to listen to my heart, she informed him solemnly, like always. This had become their ritual during his clinical rotations at the pediatric cardiac unit. Every time he volunteered there, Emma would insist on being his first patient. Sarah Collins appeared in the doorway, smiling at the scene. Sorry, Marcus. She wouldn't let us go to the ceremony without stopping here first. I wouldn't have it any other way, he replied, and meant it. Little Treasures had become more than just the place where he'd found his redemption. It was where he'd discovered his calling, where he'd learned that sometimes the deepest wounds could become the greatest gifts, if you were brave enough to learn from them. The daycare itself had transformed too. The Jordan Wheeler Foundation had funded a complete renovation, including state-of-the-art medical monitoring systems and emergency equipment. What had happened with Emma would never happen again. Ms. Patricia appeared from her office, carrying a small gift-wrapped package. Almost time for the ceremony, but this couldn't wait. Inside the package was a framed photograph. Marcus recognized it immediately, him and Jordan on the swings, laughing. But now it was paired with a new photo, him and Emma in almost the same pose taken just last week at the park. Below the photos was an inscription. Some angels watch from above, others walk beside us, showing us the way. For your new office, Ms. Patricia explained, the pediatric unit should know who inspired their newest nurse. Marcus traced the edge of the frame, remembering. The weight of Jordan in his arms that day, so still. The weight of Emma, just as still, but with a different ending. 2 moments that had shaped his entire life. Thank you, he managed, his voice thick. The graduation ceremony would be packed. The Collins family, his mother, Mr. Rodriguez, the entire staff of Little Treasures, even some of his former charges and their parents. The foundation's success had made headlines, and several news crews would be there to cover its first graduating class. But right now, in this quiet moment, Marcus Wheeler stood in the place where everything had changed, holding a little girl who had helped him save himself, surrounded by people who had seen past his darkest day to who he could become. Emma patted his cheek, bringing him back to the present. Time to make other kids better, she said with 3-year-old wisdom. That's right, sweet girl. He hugged her close one last time before setting her down. That's exactly right. As they all headed out to the ceremony, Marcus paused in the doorway of Little Treasures. The alphabet rug where he'd first held Emma was still there, worn but bright. The window where he'd first noticed the dropping temperature still looked out on the street where he'd made his desperate run. But now, when he remembered running through the snow, he thought not of failure but of triumph, not of loss but of second chances. not of endings but of beginnings. "Ready?" Ms. Patricia asked softly. Marcus nodded, touching the stethoscope around his neck like a talisman. "Jordan showed me the way," he said. "Now it's my turn to help show others." They stepped out into the spring sunshine, leaving behind the shadows of winter, but carrying forward its most precious lessons. That love can bridge any distance, that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes the heaviest weight we carry becomes the foundation on which we build our strongest selves. Behind them, the doors of Little Treasures closed softly, like a book reaching its final page. But for Marcus Wheeler, for Emma Collins, and for all the lives they would touch, this was just the beginning. "Race you to the car, Nurse Marmar," Emma called, already running. Marcus laughed and followed, his graduation gown billowing behind him like wings.